So we've started to learn about Django models, and they're pretty cool. And we've seen that Django is this really powerful batteries included web framework in Python. And we're starting to really kind of leverage classes and start to, we're using code that someone else wrote. We're using the Django framework. And we're sort of writing this object-oriented code and using these models. And we're starting to see how all these layers start to add up, where we learned a lot about Postgres last week, but this week, we're not even writing SQL directly. We're creating models, and then Django uses the Django models. It's probably a package or a module somewhere in the Django source code. And then it uses the psychopg2 library, or psychopg, excuse me, it's on version 3 now, to talk to Postgres specifically, right? And psychopg is our database connector, and Django models, or Django ORM, is the module that does all the thinking about, all right, I define a module, and how do I turn it into tables and columns and stuff like that. However, as we've seen, it's really helpful to understand how Postgres and relational databases work, because otherwise it'd be, I think, pretty confusing to learn models from scratch. So to kind of reiterate what we saw yesterday, what we do is we create a model, and then we can use some validation fields. And this is what we're going to dig into more of today. We got a little bit of a preview with this. I think some folks, someone used, I think, like a regex validator for a locker number, which was awesome. I want to say Cody, but I'm not sure if that was you. Did I get that right?
Yeah, that was me.
Yeah, that was awesome. So that was a preview of today. The email field, by the way, also uses a Django validator under the hood. I am like 99% certain. So we were already sort of using Django validators without realizing it. And again, what validators are about is about the input and the data coming in. And the thing to remember, the more and more you all write software, and the bigger your programs get, when I'm learning, I don't have to think about if I get bad input or can I trust this input. But doing this professionally and writing software that's actually going to be used by other people, thinking about, like, can I trust the input my program gets is a huge deal. The simplest example being user input. Eventually, the user might be, filling out a form on the browser, and then whatever gets put in there, that's what gets passed in to our model's constructor. And we just can't blindly trust stuff from users over the internet, because people make typos. Plus, there are like malicious people out there who are going to try and break stuff. And those people know how to write software too. And you could write a program to, send a huge amount of bad data to all these, to API endpoints and stuff. So there's a lot of ways for bad data to get in. Anything that's public facing on the internet, you just have to assume that all user input is not to be trusted. And even within our program, there's some value to this, because if one part of my program goes wrong, it could screw up a lot of other parts. So if there's a little bit of sort of segmentation, it's sort of called defensive programming, where, like, maybe I'm writing a class and I don't always want to, like, necessarily trust the input that comes from other programs. And the models are sort of at the heart of our application. If you think about like an onion with layers, like, we're going to write all these other classes that use the models, but the models are sort of at the heart of everything. And it makes a lot of sense to add like validation and stuff like that at the heart, because then we kind of get the benefits everywhere else. So we create a model and we add these validation fields, and everyone can see my screen, correct? And there should be this awesome diagram of like a chair and then like a chair blueprint. Cool. And we've seen that then to actually create the chair, we have to create a migration file so that Django has a plan for how it's going to generate SQL and run it against the database. And so also that Django can do this predictably and undo it predictably if we wanted to. And then we actually have to run the migration itself. Let me get my little annotation tool going up here. Right? I just not going to do a lot with it, but I just wanted to draw a circle. And then what we're going to talk about in a little bit is testing the model with much better arrows than the one I'm drawing here. And we're going to see this in a little bit. It's very useful to write unit tests and tests for our models, because if our model breaks, then a whole bunch of other stuff breaks. But if we can confirm our model's working, that gives us a lot of confidence in other parts of our code as well. So again, the stuff at the heart of the onion is where you get a lot of bang for your buck in terms of writing tests. So we've learned how to create a model, but there are some things that we should be thinking about when we make models. And this goes back to some of the schema design stuff we did last week. And you can almost think about it as like a model, and then the actual tables in the database are different ways of representing an entity. What does the model represent? I think we've learned how to sort of intuitively map how a model looks in the database, but it's always useful to think about that as well. And what fields does my model need to work the way I want it to? And what are the rules around these fields, right? The constraints or the validations. And Django validators are really powerful. And again, we use them it's sort of like the next level on constraints that we saw with Postgres, like null and not null and column types. And we can do that with our model fields, but validators are sort of like the next level of that, where we can write our own. They can get a lot more specific. I can write a regex to make sure that locker numbers follow a certain pattern. I can write a regex to make sure that for emails, the email address always has an ampersand and a dot. We can write all sorts of validation rules, excuse me. And we can do things like the minimum and maximum length of a value, or the minimum and maximum of a value and format and so on for every field. And this can really help us with our data. It helps us avoid errors. It helps us with all sorts of things. So I think probably before we get into the questions stuff, what I want to do is just start demoing some of this. And maybe what I'll do is I'll put these two side by side, because I know folks kind of found that useful. So let me go ahead and do this. I'm just doing a little orienting of my screens here. And we can sort of do this beautiful, actually what I could even do is even better. Let's actually do this. Apologies, just bear with me 1 second here, folks. I should have thought of this earlier, but I think this will actually work out quite well. Let's see if does that stay? There we go. Okay, so we'll sort of use that as a reference that you all can see as we go here. And I think that will help a bit. Though the font size here is a bit large, but that's okay. And I'm going to go ahead and I do want to get the Explorer open where I need it to be. My apologies. Sorry about this. I thought this was going to be like a really quick, slick little thing. So let me just get this going and then we'll dive in and write some code. Okay, there we go. So I'm going to use Django admin to start a project. And can everyone see the terminal font size? Okay. Okay, awesome. I'm just going to name this Pokédex Validators. It's going to be a continuation of Pokemon Pokédex, and we're going to look at validators. And because I used the dot, it put everything in a new directory, which I do kind of want. Oh no, it did it right here. Actually, let's actually do two things. I need to step back a bit. So there is a step I skipped here. Can anyone maybe remind me what the very first thing I need to do when I make a new Django project is?
Virtual environments.
Yeah, thank you so much. Very easy to forget, like I just did now. And as you all saw, Django admin worked just fine, and I've probably used pip to globally install Django at some point. And so it's not going to cause a problem right away, but down the line that can cause problems or confusion. So let me go ahead and make my virtual environment, and we're going to put it right here. And now we're going to run the little script. And remember, all this really does is change the path variable in this current shell, so that whenever I do Python-y stuff, it points inside that .them directory. And I can see over here that it's running. And now I can install Django and do all the things that I want to do. And I think what I want to do is I want to use, I think I'll just install Django, in fact. Yeah, I'm not sure where that came from. And we'll start a project, and it'll be Pokédex Validators. And now it's in a different directory, and that's kind of what I wanted. So I've got my Python virtual environment up here, and then here I've got the Pokédex Validators project. And this is okay, and this is the kind of the neat thing about Python virtual environments, because the one thing it does is it modifies the shell path directory, so that again, whenever I do Python-y stuff, you can see that the path is separated by semicolons. Like there's all these different paths. And literally whenever you run a program on the command line, the shell looks at the first path in this giant list and looks for that program to run. It looks for that name. And if it doesn't find it there, it moves on to the next. So now whenever I do anything Python-y, it will always look in this .them bin directory. So I can create a virtual environment directory wherever I want, and then once it's on, I can use it with a project in some other totally different directory. For simplicity, keeping stuff next to each other makes a lot of sense. So I'm going to move into my Pokédex Validators Python project, where I have manage py and Pokédex Validators. And I do like this a little bit because this way I can put the notes and everything a level up. Later on, when we see maybe React code goes in the same repo as Django code, this can keep stuff organized as well. So I also do have to install psychopg because we know we're going to use Postgres. And again, it doesn't matter what directory I run this pip install command from once the virtual environment is on. For simplicity, I recommend getting in the habit of just always doing everything in the same directory to avoid confusion. But you totally can. And let's see here if we can upgrade pip very quickly, like it's telling me to, and it says it succeeded, which is great. And now I've got Django installed. I've got my psychopg library installed. I'm actually just gonna run the server real quick because, like I said, I hate not having running code. It makes me nervous, and I make mistakes really easily all the time. So I like to just always be checking with running code. And honestly, whenever I'm doing any sort of web dev work, I also like to always have the console open. So this is great. I know that Django's correctly installed. What's the next thing I need to do before I even start work like that we probably want to do with almost pretty much every Django project that we do? There's two things really.
Create a database. Is that part
Yeah,
of it?
we got to create a database.
And
I'm
then
gonna,
do we also,
sorry.
do we also need to go into settings and change the SQLite to Postgres? And there's something else I can't remember.
Yep, we absolutely need to do that as well. And you all, if you all want to use the same database name and drop it from yesterday and reuse it, you can. I'm just going to create a new one named Pokédex Validators. And this create DB command is a little command line program that got installed when we installed Postgres, just to remind everyone. And it does the exact same thing of if you use pSQL to connect to Postgres, and then inside pSQL create a new database. So it's really whatever flavor you prefer. And this is Pokédex Validators. And I will go into pSQL and just list stuff. And I see Pokédex Validators right there. And I know I'm probably going to want to use pSQL some more later, so I think I'll just leave it up. And in fact, I can see there's nice little names here. Now, one common gotcha is now that I've opened up a new terminal, a new shell, the virtual environment isn't quote unquote activated here, right? If I look at my path, it's not there because each shell session starts up fresh. So I do need to activate the virtual environment again. And that is one good thing to be aware of if you like having a lot of terminal sessions open while working with Django, because that's a very easy gotcha. And then Chad, you were saying we need to modify settings PY, and we totally do. And in fact, I'm going to hit Control F or Command F to search for database. And lo and behold, there it is. And we need to change the engine, right? Tell Django the actual software that we're using. And I always forget the spelling there, but we do have to spell out the full proper name of Postgres. And then we have to change the database name, and we don't need to worry about any of this directory stuff. And we just change this to the database that we just created, which is Pokédex Validators. So now Django is going to talk to Postgres. Let's see. Did I install psychopg? I did not. Oh, I did install psychopg. Perfect. It's right there. Pip freeze prints out all the Python modules that we've installed with pip for this virtual environment, if the virtual environment is on. So I'm almost ready to go. I've created my virtual environment. I've created a new Django project. I've created a database and told Django to use it. I've installed PsychoPG. There was one more thing from yesterday that we're going to do with pretty much every Django project that we ever do.
You need
Start
to
app.
start your app.
Yeah, exactly. And I know I used Django admin before, and now I'm using manage py, which is a little inconsistent, but so be it. And I'm going to navigate into Pokédex validators because I can do a lot of work here. And I believe it was Python manage py start app. Does that look right to folks?
Yep, that looks right.
And we're just going to do Pokédex app. And I will say, I probably should have named my project Pokédex project, because there is a lot of nesting and directories here, and it can get confusing. And so I do actually think like a convention of when you create a Django project, just name the project whatever you want, underscore project makes sense. Like, because as time goes on, that directory is going to live inside other directories. So it's not the end of the world, but I think that that's a nice way to do it. And now I've got, I'm not sure if I really want the app inside the project directory. I always get confused about this as well. But in fact, I do. And this is where it gets confusing because this is, right, I have these two directories named Pokédex validators. This is the Django project stuff. This is like holding everything. So I always get a little confused by this. But I think we should be good now. And I'm just going to run my server again to make sure I haven't done anything wrong. And lo and behold, it's there. Nothing's freaking out or giving me errors. So I know that I'm good to go. So, right, that's our little setup ritual that we're going to kind of be doing day in, day out. I just kind of wanted to reiterate through that. And now let's talk a bit about validators. And let me actually just show you all the Django docs validators, because I have to say they're pretty amazing. And the Django documentation is, when it's great, and when it's frustrating, it's frustrating. When it's great, it describes things really well and has really good explanations that have that right balance of being easy to understand but giving you enough detail to be useful. When it's not great, it's hard to find things sometimes, like the way things are organized in here. Often I've just kind of had to Google to find the right Django doc that I want. And sometimes it can be a little verbose. But this part here with the validators is pretty good. And just to sort of preview this a little bit, a validator is a function. They call it a callable because Django probably has this other concept in here, but it's a function. And you can see that it uses this other Django class validationaire. Now that we're using this Django framework, there's all these classes that are written that we can use. So there's already an air class that's written for this. And basically, from what, as you can see with this example right here, I write my rule and I decide when to throw the validationaire if I'm like writing a validator from scratch. And then when I throw the error, I can pass in information about it as well, which is extremely useful as a little dictionary. And with models, when we create a model field, every field we can pass a validators argument, and we pass it a list. And in that list, we pass the different validators that we want to use. There are other ways we can use our validators directly. There's more stuff about form validation, and I'm going to demo and build this stuff in a minute. But I just wanted to preview some of the different validators that we have available. And there's a whole lot of built-in validators. And actually over here on the right, you can kind of see this list. The regex validator, the email validator that we saw yesterday, and the email validator has a validate email method. Let's see, what are some other good ones? Validate comma separated integer list, max value, min value, max length, min length, file extension validator. So these are some good ones. So just as an example, we can tell Django what file extensions are or aren't allowed. If someone is, say, uploading an image asset or a URL to a file, or the kind of file, we can have a minimum length validator that says something must be of some minimum length, a maximum length validator, minimum, maximum value validators. And this is where the documentation is good. And I would recommend going to these as your source of truth. A validator to make sure that a string is integers separated by a comma or other delimiter, which can be really useful for all sorts of things. Really, this one is sort of does the same thing. And then email validator, which you all saw yesterday. So there's a lot of really awesome validators that Django gives us for free. So let's go ahead and start using some of these. And is it useful for folks for me to kind of have the lesson up here on the side or not so much?
I mean, I have it up anyways on my computer.
Okay. I'm just gonna cut it for now then, because I feel like it's eating up screen space and I'm about to type out what we're doing. So I got to make some models and we're going to build the same Pokemon model from yesterday. And just as a reminder, the models directory lives inside the app right there, models py. So I'm going to do code Pokédex app models py. And can someone tell me, when I create this Pokemon model class, why does it have to inherit from this other model class right here from Django, models.model? Anyone have a guess?
To be able to use the models, char field, and all that stuff. And it needs to know where it's coming from.
Yeah, to use models char field. Not just that, but in the Django console yesterday, we could do Pikachu.save, Pikachu.delete. Where do those methods come from? They come from this models class, right? All of the stuff that lets this Pikachu class actually interact with the database, interact with whatever Django is doing when it creates migrations, all of that stuff comes from this models class that we inherit from. And then also the fields as well. So as with yesterday, our Pokemon needs a name. And we'll just give it a max length value of 200. We'll say that our name cannot be blank, nor can it be null. Let's give our Pokemon a level like we did yesterday. And let's set a default value. Every Pokemon is going to start at level 1. And now let's start using some validators. So Django has all these different Python modules that all these different classes reside in. Note that we import this models class from DjangoDB, and validators come from Django.core. And we can alias things and it will make things a little easier to type. So I'm going to alias validators to V, because now when I add a validator, there's a little less to type. And actually, I'll type this out fully and then I'll add the alias so you all can see what that looks like. So when I want to add a validator to a field, I get these great type-ins from VS Code. We add the validators argument, which is always going to take a list. And I could do validators dot minimum value validator of 1. Right now, the default value is always 1, but what if someone passes in -1 or 0 or something as a value for their Pokemon level? And I just have to fix my typos. And so now we have set the rule that a Pokemon's level always has to be at least 1, which is great because if somewhere in our code we make a mistake and set the Pikachu's level to -20, we don't want that to happen. Now adding validators, typing out like validators.min value all the time is going to take a lot of time. So, you know, we could do, I think we could do this, but really what's easier is to do the alias, right? And create an alias, basically sort of like a variable assignment, so that here I can just type V. This, I think, is the elegant approach that makes a lot of sense. And we also want our Pokemon to have a max level. I'm assuming that Pokemon, say, can't get over level 100. Again, I'm pretty Pokemon ignorant. And as we did yesterday, let's add a date field for when this Pokemon was first encountered. And let's add a default value just at some point in the past. And I'm not going to worry too much about blank or null. We could add those here. I think it's really up to you. Like, it's your own design decision. And now date captured. And here again, we're going to add a default value of the present moment is when this Pokemon was captured. And I just need to fix my typo over here. We could add validators here. If anyone has any requests for validators, I'm more than happy to add them. In that vein, if you all have validator requests as I go, just let me know. Oh, Andrew, thank you so much for that reminder. We almost definitely do need to import time zone, as this red squiggly is reminding me. Undefined variable time zone. So let's go ahead and import that as well. There are all sorts of different ways people organize like the order of these import statements and stuff. What I try to do is everything from Django or other libraries I'll have first. If I was importing stuff like, you know, from my own code, I would then put it sort of separated by a space. Alphabetical order is not the worst way to do it. DB, core, utils. It sounds a little silly, but it's actually pretty simple and straightforward. And now let's add our Pokemon description and let's add another validator there. So we will add a default value just of unknown. And now we're going to add some validators. We'll add, let's say, a min-length validator that the description has to have some sort of length. And we could add a max length validator here as well. I'm actually going to skip that. I think that probably doesn't make sense for description because we want it to be like a lot of text. though we probably don't want it to be like 5 pages. So actually, maybe we do want a max length validator. And I think the minimum and maximum length are characters. But let's go and find out. And I'm catching up on the chat. And I see there's an excellent question here about a time zone validator. And Megan is saying the date and date time fields have some built-in validations around dates and times. Yeah, that does make sense. Like these fields, basically what these will do will enforce that, like if you're inputting a string, I'd have to double check, but I'm almost positive the default validation is that it's like an ISO 8601 formatted like date time string. We can actually check. What actually would be great is to like be able to require a time zone for the date time field. I'm not going to look now in the validator code, but if someone wants to see if there's a way to like require a time zone for a date time field, either with a property of the field itself or validator, that would be awesome. Interestingly, we see here unique for date, month, year, so we can actually like enforce unique values for our dates. But yeah, I'm all about requiring time zones. And I see another question in the chat. Do fields like integers validate the type entered by default? And Josh, the answer is yes. I don't know if Django considers that a validator, but you know, I have an integer field here. Let's just some integer field. So, you know, these fields like by default, in fact, let's go to the Django docs here and just see what it says about integer field. Where are we hiding? And this is where the Django docs, I feel like could be a bit better, is finding things. So just like when I create a Postgres table and say a column has to be an integer and Postgres rejects everything that's not an integer, these fields will do the same thing. I'm not quite sure if Django checks that something is an integer or Django lets Postgres do it. But there is some sort of validation going on. Now, you know, I think if you pass an integer in as a string value, I'm not quite sure at what point that would be caught. But if you pass something in that's clearly not, you know, ABC, if you pass in like A, B, C, D, E, yes, the integer field absolutely will catch it. So all of these field names, you can pretty much infer by their description that there is some sort of baked-in validation going on. And remember that under the hood, what does an integer field do? Well, for the table, the Postgres table that is created to hold the data for this model, this is going to be an integer column, and this is going to be an integer column, and Postgres will complain if we don't put integers in there as well. So I'm not sure if Django does any checking for integerness before putting data into Postgres. It probably does. But then since this ends up creating a column of type integer, Postgres does as well. Yeah, that's a good question, Josh. And let's look at our max length validator. And the rule I've kind of discovered with all this stuff is I really try not to make assumptions about how these things work. I really want to, I like to find out. So max length validator, it's not telling me what it's measuring, but I'm pretty sure it's measuring characters. I'm like 99% sure, but it's nice to kind of find things. And actually, this is a whole rabbit hole, which we won't go down. I'm seeing this is a rabbit hole, but in essence, what we're gonna do is we're just gonna add a max length validator here of the max length validator. Let's just say, I'm gonna say 300. We get a little more, a couple more characters to describe our Pokemon. And then, just as we did yesterday, we need to be able to identify if a Pokemon is captured or not, and that'll be a Boolean field. And again, as to your point, Josh, you know, Django will complain, or Postgres will complain if we try to stick anything in here that is not a Boolean, that is not true or false. You can think of validation as sort of like an extra layer that happens before like the basic rules of most of these fields. Though some of these fields, like email field, explicitly does use a validator to do some of that work. So I've made a bunch of models, or I've made a bunch of fields on my model. Can someone maybe remind me what's the next step I have to do? Like now I actually, like, all right, I'm in Postgres, I'm in P-SQL here. Let's connect to the Pokédex validators database. And there's no tables in it. What's my next step to actually like create a table to store the data for this model in the database? So when the Django web server stops or restarts or crashes, the Pokemon data is saved.
You want to make migrations.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Andrew. And so I'm going to use Python manage py, and I'm going to use the make migration command. And come on, autocomplete, make migrations. And actually, let's run help real quick so we can see some of the interesting options here. This is a cool option. Dry run, show what migrations would be made. Don't actually write them. Let's see if there's any other useful ones in here. There's a verbosity setting if we want to see more details about the migrations when we do them. Let's just do a dry run real quick. Let's see what that looks like. So interesting that it says no changes detected. I wonder if I've done something wrong here.
Oh, I think it's Sean mentioned that we didn't put the app in settings.
Oh, Sean and Clarice, thank you so much. Excellent point. And this is actually a great example of, let's see what happens if we run this. This is a great example, like this could be a pretty frustrating error to debug, right? Because we're not getting any error messages. Nothing is actually breaking. So this is, I have to say, if I had run into this and not gotten some help from you, Clarice, and from Sean, then I might have sunk a decent amount of time into this. So my sort of little mini retro on how to debug this effectively is get someone else to look at the code, or like walk away for 10 minutes and look at the code again, because it's hard to get an error message or data to tell me what I did wrong here, which is usually what I rely on for debugging. And also the value of like having a checklist. You know, I should have just had a little written checklist next to me as I was building my Django project, and then I would have remembered to do this. So let's go ahead and let me search for that installed apps. Here it is. Let's add our Pokédex app. And I guess the other takeaway here is if you're expecting there to be migrations and there are none, and you've just started the project, double check if we've added our Django app to settings py. And now let's try the dry run. Awesome. So this hasn't actually created migrations. Yep, there's nothing in there. It's just showing us what it would do. It would create this initial py file, migrations file that's going to create our Pokemon model. And let's actually go ahead and run that. So now I've created the migration that I can then run and apply that Django will use to actually generate some SQL that will actually modify the Postgres database, right? Creating the migration doesn't actually touch Postgres at all. And I believe the command is just migrate. And just like with make migrations, there are some useful helper options here. There's one in particular, plan, show a list of the migration actions that will be performed. That is a very cool one to run, and I think I'll run that in just a moment. I thought there was one for like showing the actual SQL that gets executed, but I'm not sure if it's in here. Let's see, fake initial, fake. That's all things you don't have to worry about. Dominates the database. Synchronized detective tables already exist. Blah, 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 blah. No, I think it's mainly the plan one. So let's run this and just to see what it looks like. This, like if you're ever not sure if you should run a migration or not, the plan command is a good one. And we don't see the actual SQL, but we do see a pretty close summary. And we can see here, this is all the stuff that Django does to set up, create model. So it's going to create all these tables and fields and all this stuff. And then all the way down here is it creates the Pokemon model. And now we've gone ahead and done that. And now if I go to P-SQL for my database, we've got all the stuff. Awesome. Let's see here. Was there anything I wanted to show with the migrations? I think that's the main thing. A quick note about migrations. As I mentioned yesterday, they get run in order. So like, you know, we'll modify the Pokemon and it'll add another migration file. Like, in fact, let's go ahead and do this now. Just some field equals models, not integer field. And that's all I'm even gonna do to it. Oh, I guess it needs me to add a default. Because I didn't add like the nullable options. And now, when I run this migrate command, or if I use the plan, it tells me what it's going to do, right? It already ran all the other migrations. So here we're just adding some field to Pokemon. And so the migrations tool, it runs the migrations in order every time, but it does have ways to check if a migration is already run or not. And you can see too, like each migration, like this second migration points back to the first migration, which is sort of how Git commits work. So it's sort of like a linked list, is how these migrations work. And then we won't do this directly, but like if I wanted to undo this, I could actually undo this migration. And that has now added that P-SQL. And actually, if I want to show, yeah, well, I'm not going to worry about rolling back migrations. That's a more advanced feature that we don't need to worry about right now, though it is quite cool. So we'll take a break in a couple minutes. I think the last thing I do want to show is writing our own validator function. And I also want to show how to use validators. And this part is actually pretty valuable. So let me create the Django console. Well, let me run the Django console. So now I'm in the console. I want to create a Pokemon. So I need to do something like this. The name of my app, so that Django knows where to go to find the models directory. And we want to import Pokemon. And let me go ahead and close this and this, since we care about neither of those. And it looks like I have a typo because that O was uppercase. And I'm just going to type Pokemon to make sure that that works. And let me go ahead and create a Pokemon. And again, in my Pokemon ignorance, I really don't know much about Bulbasaur, but we're going to create him. And there's a couple ways to do this. I could do Pokemon objects.create. As yesterday, I can also just do, I believe like this to call the constructor directly. And there might be some subtle differences between those two. I would actually have to look that up. But now we've got Bulbasaur. You know, let's actually add a dunder string method here. And let's just return the name of the Pokemon. And let's see what this is complaining about. String does not return string. It wants me to be really explicit that we're returning a string. So I'll use an F string to put the Pokemon name in there. And I will have to re-import the model. But that should be all I have to do. No, I'm not going to worry too much about the name stuff at the moment. What I really want to show is there's this command full clean. And this is how validations get run. And let me actually just jump to this bit in the docs to show you all, because this is quite useful. Where are we hiding? Because I did just have this a moment ago. This is where the Django docs, I feel like, leave a little bit to be desired. This is the bit we want, validating objects for how validators are run in models. We're not going to really use Django forms. We kind of replace where Django forms would be with React, but we do use validators with models. And this is the bit that I wanted to show. And this is, let me throw this in the Zoom chat. And if someone could actually repost this to the main Slack, I'd appreciate it. This is a useful thing to file away. And again, it's always good to know exactly how a program is behaving. So as it says here, there are 4 steps in validating a model. We validate the model fields, which we could run if we wanted with this method clean fields. We validate the model as a whole. And I'm not sure exactly what that is, but I can make some guesses about making sure the field relations are good, checking like, all right, did we have fields that fail? Validate field uniqueness actually happens as its own step. And there's again a method we could run if we wanted to. Validating our constraints. So validation is broken up into steps, both so that we can use specific bits of it if we ever want to. Like there might be a time when we just want to check uniqueness or constraints for a model. So having this validate constraints and validate unique method is really useful. What we usually want to do is this full clean method that does all the validation, right? This is by far the easiest way to use validation. And this is the step now that we have to add, before we save a model to our database. So with Bulbasaur's got a name. Let me add something that actually violates a model. Let me see if I can find, there we go. Let's give Bulbasaur a level of 100. And just one moment, folks, I have to turn off an alarm. Hey, sorry about that. So this is interesting, right? We have this constraint, but Bulbasaur's level is 100 or 1000, which clearly violates our max value constraint. So this is to point out that, you know, Django doesn't run validation immediately. Most of the time we have to explicitly tell Django to run our validators. And remember, since our Pokemon class inherits from this model class, right? And all of this validation stuff is from that model class. That's where our Pokemon class gets all of these methods. So let's do Bulbasaur full clean and see what happens. Aha, now we get a validation error. And this is scary looking, but this is exactly what we want, because that's what validators do. They raise validation errors, and then we can write Python code to handle those validation errors. And here we get a really useful message about what the validation error is. Right? So now I don't want to just do Bulbasaur.save. I'm pretty sure this would actually, I think, short circuit full clean. I don't think save applies full clean off the bat. And in fact, we could check if we look somewhere here in like the Django model docs. And let's see here. There's validating objects. And then if we scroll down a bit more, there's saving objects, which is, you can jump to right here. So there's a whole bunch of stuff in here, yada, da, da, da. But what I'm not seeing is something saying like that validation gets run. And in fact, what happens when you save? There's a whole bunch of steps here. And nowhere in any of these steps do I see the word validation. So we need to run full clean before we save. So for example, if I'm writing update level, but let's just make it set level. And I'll just call this new level. And we need to pass self in there as well. I want to do self dot level equals new level, self dot full clean, self dot save. And if I missed a step here or got a typo wrong with this, someone please do let me know. I believe this is kind of the correct pattern that we had from yesterday for writing these kinds of model methods. Right. And in fact, if I get tired of writing full clean and save all the time, maybe what I'll do is I'll just write a little method like full clean save self dot full clean. Self dot save. I don't know if this is the best idea or not, but it's worth pointing out that it's an option just for something to think about. And voila, I don't have to remember to manually type full clean all the time. That is now one typo that it is literally impossible for me to make. And I know I've ran a bit over an hour. I think the last thing I do want to show is writing a validator and using it. And I think I just want to kind of quickly build it out. I'm not going to go into too much detail on the implementation. And let's go ahead and let's create a validators directory. Let's make it somewhere inside Pokédex app. So I'm just going to do it this way for expediency. You might even want to put this inside, like, you probably don't want to put it inside models PY, but you could if you wanted to. So to write our own validator, we need to import validation error, because that's the main thing of what a validator does. I'm going to do a little bit of regex. So I'm going to import the Python's built-in regex directory. And we're going to validate Pokemon names. Really, we could use this to validate any general name. And I'm just going to write the error message we send if something does go wrong. And we want to regex for valid names. And I am borrowing this from the guide code for the lesson. Writing regexes is a pain. I usually look up Stack Overflow. And in the lesson doc, we have a good explanation of what each bit of this regex is doing. But the essence of it is this applies a series of rules against a string to see if the string matches a pattern. The string has to consist of characters from capital A through capital Z, or lowercase a through lowercase z. And that's it. The name is letters only. And I'll name this valid. I'll just name this good name actually to match with what we have here. And here's how you use a regex. Use this re.match function or method. And this returns a Boolean. And if the name is good, we return the name. Otherwise, we raise a validation error. Just like we saw happen with the max length validation error. And we can pass in our error message. And we can also pass in params, which is really the most useful part, because this lets the programmer write code to look at information about the error and handle it or diagnose the bug. And now I've written a validate name validator, and now I can actually use it in my Pokemon model. Let me go ahead and just split these two here so you all can see what's going on. And I'll leave the validator over here. And this is just complaining. Validate name is just letters. It just wants a dot string. And this is, oh, and in fact, I have Python. There is sort of best practices, like you import the import statements from the most fundamental thing should be first. This is from the Python standard library, so it should go before all the Django stuff. That's what it won't break anything, but that's a good habit. And my linter was telling me that and complaining that I wasn't doing that. And let's see. Oh, missing module dot string. Let's just say Pokédex. And now, like, this is what I like to do is I'll add a dot string here that says like imports from my code. Or maybe let's just make some comments so Python won't complain. So I like to do it this way. Keep things just separate. You can do it a bunch of different ways. And now over here in our name field, we can add a validator. And now I would have to, why don't I actually exit this? I haven't actually saved Bulbasaur, which is fine. But let me go ahead and re-import the Pokemon model. Let's create Bulbasaur again. Let's call them Bulbasaur 1, 2, 3. And let's run full clean and watch what happens. And we get a validation error. Right, so now, which is great. If I needed like to change the name, I could write a set name method like this as well. Let's try to, let's change Bulbasaur's name to something valid. And let's just run this set level method now that we wrote it. Let's run it to 1000 and see if it fails. And indeed, that works great. It ran full clean. And apparently now I'm getting the improper name format on save for set level, which can happen since we're running full clean here on set level. It's checking everything.
It quotes around his name.
Say that again.
Is it because you added quotes around his name?
I don't think so, because that sets it as a string. I think this may be, I may have encountered something more complex in the validation. Oh, Francisco, I see you throwing an annotation around the A to Z of the regex.
Yes, the regex is asking that the name starts with a capital letter.
Oh, of course. Thank you so much. And honestly, that is a great thing to have the regex do. So validate name is just letters and starts with capital letter. And honestly, that just goes to show that when you're borrowing regex from Stack Overflow or any other guide code, you need to be careful. So this is a great example of a bug where the problem is not actually in the code. It was doing exactly what it should. In fact, it was doing exactly what we wanted to. The problem was in my understanding of the code. So let's give Bulbasaur a proper name. And let's run set level again. But this is also why full clean and setting it up to use it all the time is great, because we actually did have a problem, right? But we didn't know it. And interesting. I wonder.
Could it be because you ended the regex statement with the % instead of the $sign?
Oh, that would totally be it. That would make a huge difference. I'm not even sure what the % versus $sign does there. Let's see. I'm not sure if Django is smart enough to Yeah, I think I'm hitting a point of diminishing returns here. And I do want us to take a break, and then have some work time. So we'll give this one more shot, and then if this doesn't work, we'll call it. But we kind of got the idea, and most importantly, we got to see the full clean in action. So let's import Pokemon. Let's make a valid Bulbasaur. Let's actually just run full clean on Bulbasaur right now to see if everything is good. So that's good. That was an excellent catch. Thank you so much. This is where regexes get tricky. Honestly, the way to solve this is you write unit tests for like your validation functions. And part of the value of that is making sure we know exactly what they're doing. Now let's try setting Bulbasaur's level to something valid, like 100. And now there we go. And it should be saved. And if I look at my database, we've got Bulbasaur. And not only do we have Bulbasaur in Postgres, but we have this really awesome validation logic that you all just got to see in action. So let me just check in real quick to see if folks have any questions, and then we'll take a break. Okay, awesome. Let me stop the recording.